In today's video, whilst not going into great detail, I will be discussing animal testing techniques. No disturbingly gory details will be shared. Viewer discretion is still advised. The history of animal testing goes back thousands of years. It's a complex and often quite controversial subject, closely linked to the history of human experimentation. Today, I want to take a look at the ancient origins of animal testing, the medical advancements it contributed to, how the laws and ethics surrounding the topic have evolved and continue to evolve, and what the future holds for testing methods in the cosmetics industry. The origins of animal testing dates back as far as the 4th century BCE. That's almost 2,500 years ago. No, that doesn't feel right. Does that feel right? That doesn't feel like that long. The leading force in the world of science and biology at the time was ancient Greece, which is where the earliest evidence of animal testing, animal experimentation we should say, actually comes from. The oldest known example of animal experimentation was conducted by Alcmaeon of Croton? I don't know if that's even a name that still exists anymore. Very interesting though, who proved that the optic nerve was necessary for sight after cutting the optic nerve in living animals and observing that this made them blind. Horrible. Why do they need to do that? I'm already annoyed with animal testing. I hate it, obviously. There are also written records of Greek physician Hippocrates and philosopher Aristotle having carried out experiments mostly on dead animals. I have a dog here, there we go. And Aristotle was known to have proven that there were anatomical differences in different animal species through his tests. It's kind of a given, right? I don't know if that's like a given or like it's just because we know it to this day, but that sounds obvious. Animal testing continued throughout ancient Greece and eventually spread into the Roman Empire. And there were many discoveries made during this time by ancient physicians and philosophers, with one of the most notable being Galen of Pergamon. He is infamous for conducting many experiments on animals after being banned from conducting human experiments. He would use pigs, monkeys, birds, and even lions in his experiments, which led to anatomical, physiological, pathological, and pharmaceutical discoveries. Although often brutal and disgusting, his experiments led to the foundation of many modern-day medical practices. However, along with the start of the fall of the Roman Empire, the study of autonomy and physiology in both humans and animals declined rapidly. For a variety of reasons that I won't go into in this video, because that's more like history stuff, right? But essentially, people's beliefs went backwards, with many going back to believing in more supernatural causes for diseases and death rather than trying to find scientific explanations. This led to a period of around 1,000 years where animal experimentation was almost non-existent. Apart from Avenzoar, an Arab surgeon who developed and tested new surgical procedures on animals, animal testing didn't actually become popular again until the 1500s. Andreas Vesalius, a physician and lecturer from Brussels, founded modern anatomical science in the middle of the 16th century, and he believed that the dissection of human bodies could serve a scientific purpose and encouraged his university students to carry out dissections and see if what the textbooks told them was true. However, of course, it was difficult for him and his students to get hold of enough human cadavers, so they often resorted to using animal cadavers instead. He also repopularized vivisection, which is a practice of performing surgery on a living animal that the ancient Greeks had started. And animal testing actually continued to grow in prevalence over the next few centuries, driven particularly by the rise of what's called empirical science during the 17th and 18th centuries, which led to systematic animal testing and the birth of animal testing as we know it today. But as I said earlier, animal testing has been actually closely linked to human testing throughout history, and although animals have been used in experiments for thousands of years, humans were historically the original test subjects. Historical accounts show that humans, usually slaves, prisoners, or the poor, were often used for testing throughout all of history. And in fact, the earliest account comes from the Bible and dates back to 562 BC, if you were to believe the Bible. In ancient Egypt and the early Roman Empire, it was actually fairly common for criminals who were being condemned to death, and the most famous example of this is probably when Queen Cleopatra was testing a variety of snake venoms on condemned criminals in order to work out the effects and toxicity levels of the different venoms. Many examples of of human testing can be seen throughout the centuries. In the Middle Ages, apothecaries often tested their awful, weird concoctions on patients who had no idea they were being used as guinea pigs. And these concoctions, you know, like back in the day where they'd be like, oh, let's put some lead and some pig shit in a medicine, you know, that kind of thing. But these mixtures would include really bizarre ingredients like urine, fecal matter, earwax, and even ground up human skulls. Like, this is witchcraft, essentially. But these doctors' patients were used in very early experiments. They were their guinea pigs. They were like, oh, give this a try. Later in the 18th century, physicians like Edward Jenner, often regarded as the father of immunology, conducted their own human testing. Jenner, who's no relation to Kendall and Kylie, is well known to have carried out tests on an 8-year-old boy while developing his smallpox vaccine. He first injected the boy with cowpox, which is a less dangerous version of smallpox, and the boy got ill for a few days but then made a full recovery. Jenner then infected the boy twice with smallpox to test whether or not immunity to cowpox was also transferred to smallpox, and luckily for the boy, it was. But this sort of thing was commonplace back then, you know, they just didn't care back then. The idea of informed consent was non-existent, and that led to tests being carried out on all sorts of vulnerable populations, including orphans, prisoners, and the mentally ill. The low social status back then and lack of legal protection really made them really easy targets for these doctors and scientists at the time. Like, these are the doctors and like dentists and surgeons that you have nightmares about, the ones that like harvest your organs whilst you're just going in for like, I don't know, like some dental work, for like a filling. But unfortunately though, this sort of unethical treatment of lower social classes got even worse in the 19th and 20th centuries when, like animal testing, human testing became systematic, meaning it was starting to be done on a much larger scale. One of the most infamous examples of this is the Tuskegee Syphilis Study, which took place between 1932 and 1972. I was born in the next decade. That feels way too modern. This is where almost 400 African American men in the US who suffered from syphilis were left untreated so that so-called scientists could study the disease's progression and effects on the body. This was at the time when the cure penicillin was already available. The men who were mostly impoverished, like farmers or sharecroppers, technically, were lied to about their condition and what the experiment would actually involve. And more than 100 of these men died as a result. And even more shockingly, this study was actually funded by the US Public Health Service. But unfortunately, that is not the worst example that we have. The most infamous examples of unethical human testing are Nazi experiments on prisoners throughout World War II. Between 1939 and 1945, Nazi doctors performed a whole range of horrendous medical experiments on prisoners held in concentration camps. I don't want to go into detail again because it's not a history video. I don't want to go into horrible, gory detail because these experiments were horrific, often resulting in death, disfigurement, and permanent disability. But as such, these experiments are considered examples of medical torture, not experiments, medical torture, because the prisoners had to endure huge amounts of pain as part of them. After World War II, the Nuremberg trials led to the development of the Nuremberg Code, which emphasized the need for informed consent and laid the groundwork for today's ethics when it comes to human medical studies. And due to this, and due to human testing becoming heavily scrutinized, of course, after World War II, due to ethical concerns, there was a big shift towards animal testing, and the rise of modern pharmaceuticals and cosmetics in the 1900s increased the use of animals for safety and efficacy testing, with animals becoming the standard for preclinical trials in order to reduce the risk involved with early human testing. So, examples of animal testing pretty much include injecting or force-feeding animals with potentially harmful substances, surgically removing animals' organs or tissues deliberately to cause damage, forcing animals to inhale toxic gases, and subjecting animals to frightening situations to create anxiety and depression, with some experiments even requiring the animal to die as part of the test. With common methods including dermal penetration, skin sensitization, acute toxicity tests, and skin corrosivity or irritation tests. Dermal penetration is usually done on rats and involves shaving a patch of hair on the back, applying a chemical to their skin, and then killing the rats at various time intervals after exposure so that they can analyze the extent to which the chemical has penetrated the skin and entered the bloodstream. And one of the most notable examples used in cosmetics testing, as well as other areas, is the LD50 test, which was invented in 1927. It's a test used to determine the lethal dose of a substance, and it has become notorious among animal rights activists in the decades since its use began. And this test requires that animals are given increasingly high doses of whatever ingredient is being tested until 50% of the animal group dies. The test is often criticized for its cruelty, and many claim it doesn't provide accurate data for humans, despite there being more accurate and humane ways to test the toxicity of substances. This method is unfortunately still used all over the world, and that's something that we'll talk about, but I don't see the point in animal testing. Like, what is the fucking point? They're never accurate to the way humans use product or the dosage that we use ingredients. It doesn't make sense. It feels so outdated and so medieval. It's stupid. It's fucking stupid. Another commonly used method is the Draize test. This might be one of the most well-known tests to like the general public, and it's often what people think of when they think of animal testing. The Draize test involves applying a product or substance to the eyes or skin of rabbits to test for irritation, often causing significant harm and discomfort to the animals. This test has been very widely used in the cosmetics industry, and although its use has declined, again, it is still used to this day. Animal testing has undeniably contributed to significant medical breakthroughs. In fact, almost every drug or treatment in current medical use has been developed or validated through animal experiments. Vaccines, blood transfusions, heart surgery, insulin medication, organ transplants, antibiotics, and more have all been developed with the help of animal research. And supporters of the practice argue that preclinical testing on animals helps ensure that drugs, cosmetics, and other products are safe before they are tested on humans. They also point out that there is a lot we still don't know about human physiology, like why we get sick and how to actually cure ourselves. They also say that despite the ethical issue of testing in animals, it's still better than testing in humans. But despite these arguments, public backlash against the use of animal testing has been very strong, understandably, and continues to grow with every passing year. The sentiment is particularly strong when it comes to cosmetics. A growing majority of consumers are questioning whether animal testing is still appropriate at all in the cosmetics industry, and many consumers outright refuse to support companies that still test on animals, which I agree with because it's outdated. And although there were always some people who spoke out against animal cruelty, it didn't become very common, at least in the West, until the 1800s. The first major piece of animal protection legislation was passed in England in 1822. The Ill Treatment of Horses and Cattle Bill made it an offence to beat, abuse, or ill-treat any horse, donkey, cow, sheep, or other type of cattle. The first organisation working to end animal testing was formed in 1875, known at the time as Victoria Street Society. They're still going to this day actually as the National Anti-Vivisection Society, which again is the practice of performing operations on live animals for experiments, has been growing for a few years, and in 1876 the Cruelty to Animals Act was passed in England. This was the first legislation passed to protect animals used in experiments, and several other countries followed suit very shortly after. Although animal rights activists at the time didn't believe the new legislation did anywhere near enough to actually protect animals, these were the first steps in a long fight for better animal rights. And unfortunately, this fight is still ongoing, 150 years later, with many believing that there is still a lot of work to be done in order to properly protect animals. For decades, public criticism of animal testing practices has continued to grow, and it's probably no coincidence that this is happening alongside a growing awareness among the public of what is actually being done to these animals. I feel like back in the day, I used to literally think that animal testing was just using the finished product on an animal. Like, I always imagined a rabbit with lipstick on kind of thing. I don't think I really knew the extent to what it was until like I was in my early 20s. Working for Lush, funnily enough, I found out from a lot of people I work with what the actual practices were. And it's not to downplay what I thought it was at the time. I still thought it was awful, but I thought it was like, oh, they're putting a cleanser, on an animal, and that's the extent of it. So the more the general public finds out about how animal testing is really carried out, the more outrage we seem to fill, and rightfully so. Many believe that animal testing in its current form still raises major ethical concerns, given that it involves the suffering and death of millions of animals every year. Critics point out that many of the tests used are painful, invasive, and often result in the animals involved being killed at some point in the process. Many also have an issue with the fact that animals can't consent to being used as test subjects, obviously, saying that if this research is for the benefit of humans, then consenting humans should be used in these studies if no alternative is available. And I'm going to be honest with you, that's what I believe. I believe we live in a time where if you sign the right forms, if you agree to the right stuff, and you are fully aware of what's going on, if they pay you enough money or compensate you in some way, test on humans. Controversial too? Maybe. They also claim that animal testing doesn't always effectively predict how drugs, chemicals, or treatments may work in humans. They claim that there are too many differences between animals and humans for the testing to be the most accurate method or for it to be of any use at all. And I agree, because this is where we see a lot of these studies turn into misinformation and fear-mongering. Parabens is a great example. The fear of parabens stemming from an experiment on a rat, which was pointless because what did it lead to? Nothing. We know nothing. The information that came from it is not helpful in any way. It didn't prove anything or linked accurately to the way that we as humans use these products or how they affect us. It just seems pointless. It's like me wanting to test out a stain remover and being like, oh, before testing out the stain remover on my clothes, I'm going to test it out on a rock. Is that a bad example? So it just doesn't why are you doing that stage? It kind of feels a little bit stupid, because although we have organs, we have, similarities in some places, we're so different still, different enough for it to be pointless. That's my opinion. I'm sure there are many reasons on the medicine side of things that I don't understand, but when it comes to cosmetics, what's the point? With that being said, some of the supporters in favor of animal testing, they say that experiments on animals are necessary in order to advance medical and biological knowledge, and that life-saving treatments that come about as a result justify the use of animal testing. And whilst many actually agree with that idea, there are still plenty who believe that everything possible should be done to avoid animal testing, and that alternative methods should be used as much as possible. And critics point out that although animal testing, yes, has been used and led to life-saving treatments in humans, that doesn't justify the use of animal testing in non-essential products. So it's unsurprising that the cosmetics industry is where the outrage against animal testing seems to be the most prevalent, but also where the most progress has been made. In 1998, the UK became the first country to issue a ban on animal-tested cosmetics products. This ban was for finished cosmetics products as well as ingredients primarily intended for vanity purposes. Well, vanity products, sorry. The EU had actually passed legislation for a ban on animal-tested cosmetic products 5 years earlier in 1993, but they kept delaying the start of the ban because they didn't believe enough alternative testing methods were available. So the full ban didn't come into effect in the EU until 2013. Several other countries brought in similar laws around the world and around the same time, including Norway, Switzerland, Liechtenstein, Iceland, and Israel, who had actually banned the use of animals to test on cosmetics back in 2007, but didn't ban the sale of such cosmetics until 2013. And over the next few years, even more places brought in animal testing bans for cosmetic products, including the state of Sao Paulo in Brazil, Indiana, and New Zealand. Although only on animal testing in the country, imported items were still allowed to be tested on animals. Many obviously criticized the New Zealand government, for this half-hearted attempt basically at just trying to please animal rights activists, trying to keep them off for a bit. Now, I'm sure many of you are wondering where two of the biggest countries in the cosmetics industry stand on all of this: the USA and China. And unfortunately for both countries, the answer is complicated, and I'll try and break it down for you because it seems like every year something changes. A bill was introduced to the US Congress in 2014, which would have banned cosmetics testing on animals and the sale of cosmetics tested on animals, but sadly that bill didn't pass. However, since then, similar bills have been passed in 12 US states. That includes California, Nevada, Illinois, Hawaii, Maryland, Maine, New Jersey, Virginia, Louisiana, New York, Oregon, and Washington. But there is still no federal ban in place, so the vast majority of the US states still have no ban on animal testing. This is surprising to a lot of people who assume that the US must have banned animal testing days days, like years and years, centuries ago. But sadly, that isn't the case. China's animal testing laws are even more complicated and have changed regularly over the past decade. While many countries still haven't banned animal testing for cosmetics, China has been the only country that actively requires animal testing to be done, with one of the main issues being that they require post-market animal testing on cosmetics products coming in from outside of China, which meant that any cosmetic companies who wanted to sell their products in China could not be considered cruelty-free. These requirements, I'm sure we're aware, have relaxed a little bit in the last few years, and essentially whether or not China now requires animal testing for cosmetics products comes down to what type of cosmetic it is. So China makes a distinction between special use or special cosmetics and ordinary or general cosmetics. Special use cosmetics include products that have a specific functional claim. So you're thinking hair dyes, sunscreens, whitening products, and hair removal products. Whereas general or ordinary cosmetics products are basically everything else, right? General makeup, general skincare, hair care, nail polish even, and perfumes. Nail polish surprises me, I don't know why. Essentially, if a product is general use, then it is no longer required to have animal testing done on it in order to be sold in mainland stores in China. But if a product is special use, then animal testing is still required to be sold on shelves in Chinese stores. General products can qualify for this exemption from animal testing as long as the manufacturer can provide a certificate of compliance with good manufacturing practice, issued by the governing authority of the product's home country, as well as safety assessment results that thoroughly confirm the product's safety. Products aimed at babies, expectant mothers, and products using new ingredients within their 3-year monitoring period are also still required to undergo animal testing. And it's worth noting that the exemption to testing only refers to pre-market testing. It is still possible that post-market animal testing could be carried out. However, this is fairly unlikely that this will happen to products that have been approved for the exemption, as this only occurs when a product is found to pose a serious safety risk, which, if it has met the exemption requirements for safety, then assessment is unlikely, right? Also, brands have the option to withdraw any products from the shelves rather than submit to post-market testing if it is required. And it's kind of pricey too, so a lot of people won't do it. That's not to say it won't happen, but it's also not to say it will. But there are still plenty of hoops that international brands have to jump through to qualify for this exemption from animal testing. But it's at least a move in the right direction. Hopefully, growing demand for cruelty-free brands around the world will continue to create changes in Chinese and worldwide regulations for cosmetic products. Now, these changes in animal testing laws, particularly in the cosmetic industry, have been made possible due to advancements in the development of alternative testing methods. Without the development of alternative testing methods such as in vitro test tube tests, computer modeling, non-invasive diagnostic imaging, and human cell cultures, it's unlikely that we'd see the changes we have seen in like the last decade. One of the most commonly used alternatives is in vitro examination. And this testing method uses human cell cultures that are grown in laboratories specifically for testing. Virtually every human cell can be grown in this way. And this method allows the scientists to basically reconstruct the epidermis for testing and can allow for detailed examination of specific reactions to a potential drug or other treatment. But it's not perfect. Obviously, critics argue that the cells are not exposed to all the processes in the body, such as hormones, growth factors, and other chemicals that naturally occur in the body. Despite these downsides, it is a useful alternative to animal testing and a major breakthrough in this area, especially when it comes to cosmetics. And another major breakthrough when it comes to testing cosmetics was the creation of a synthetic skin test called Cosmetic, which makes it possible to test if a certain chemical causes skin corrosion. Tissue cultures, which involve taking thin sections of organs like livers and kidneys, is another method used to study the possible effects of drugs on these organs. However, they are difficult to maintain, they have a limited lifespan, and like in vitro, they can't give the wider information about the possible effects in other parts of the body. body, or how other parts of the body affect the tissue being studied. Now, computer modeling or in silico testing has advanced dramatically over the past decade or so. The method has brought about significant changes to testing in many areas, including the cosmetics industry. Advanced algorithms can be used to predict where certain chemicals contained in cosmetics may end up in the body, as well as their potential toxicity and efficacy. This is one of the most promising alternatives to animal testing, which is heavily promoted and funded by PETA and other leading animal rights organizations. The other main alternative to animal testing at the moment is a bit of a step back in time, and it's testing on humans. Although this time, instead of using slaves or prisoners or the poor, researchers are using human volunteers. So for example, skin sensitivity tests are being carried out on human volunteers nowadays, which is not only a good thing because animals don't have to suffer, but also because the animal's skin often isn't a good replica of human skin. So it makes sense to do it on human skin, right? And these tests are often carried out to test whether a product can be used for things like anti-aging, brightening, cellulite reduction, hydration, and much more. And obviously these alternative methods have many, many benefits. Not only do they put an end to animal suffering, but they are also often more cost-effective than animal testing and can produce more accurate results in many cases. I just want to really quickly touch on, because I feel like this could be a whole other thing, because this video will go on for a very, very long time otherwise, but there's a really kind of like difficult conversation to be had and kind of awkward conversation to be had. And I'd love to get your thoughts on this because I kind of think of it in two places. L'Oreal is known to do animal testing. They sell products in mainland China. And although they state on their website that many of their products are cruelty-free, because of what China require or had required and still do require for special use products, whatever it's called, a lot of their products are still tested on animals. L'Oreal is also one of the biggest financial reasons that China is able to have these alternative testing methods. L'Oreal have been at the forefront of developing non-animal testing techniques like skin tissue models, and it's those techniques that China are now using. They have partnered with Chinese scientists and Chinese government, and they basically said like, look, this is how these alternative testing methods can provide accurate and reliable outcomes, reliable safety assessments. And they were a key player in the 2021 regulatory reform as well in China. They really pushed forward the alternative testing methods and the regulations and changing the law in China. And they invest heavily in their Chinese labs, which focus on these alternative testing methods. So it was an interesting conversation because do you not support L'Oreal at all and boycott them, knowing that your money in some way goes to animal testing potentially in China? Or do you buy them knowing that they are pushing forward and still working to end animal testing? Like, serious question. Like, it's not like a like which one's right. It's like what do you do? What do you do? Like, what do you do? I don't think any answer is right. I don't think you're wrong for buying L'Oreal. I don't think you're right for boycotting L'Oreal either. I think it's a really interesting position to be in. Let's talk about these cruelty-free certifications. I just want to go not off topic, but sway off a little bit here. Now, animal cruelty-free certifications, terms we've all seen, but do we really know what they mean? Logos like Leaping Bunny, for example, and lists from platforms like Cruelty-free Kitty promise transparency and ethics in the beauty industry, but how reliable really are they? I think this is something that really trips people up. What are these certifications? What are the pros? What are the cons? And even what are some of the controversies that might surprise you? So the Leaping Bunny program is run by the Coalition for Consumer Information on Cosmetics, or CCIC, in the US and Canada, and by Cruelty-free International globally. Brands certified by Leaping Bunny must meet pretty strict requirements. They cannot test on animals, obviously, at any stage of development. They must audit their entire supply chain to ensure ingredients aren't tested on animals either. And they have to agree to annual independent audits to maintain their certification. Meanwhile, Cruelty-free Kitty is more of a consumer-driven resource. It isn't really like an official certifying body, but rather a platform that vets brands to ensure that they don't test on animals or sell in regions like China. It's more like a curated list, right, rather than a formal certification. Now, there's no doubt that cruelty-free certifications are helpful. They are, right? They offer transparency for consumers who want to shop ethically. That little bunny logo, it reassures you that like no animals were harmed to make your skincare or your makeup. For brands, certifications are also a marketing advantage, especially as more consumers demand ethical practices in beauty. Plus, these programs encourage global advocacy for animal welfare, pushing industries to adopt alternatives, all the alternatives we've discussed. It's like a win-win, right? But not always, not always. So let's talk about the cons of the cruelty-free certification. I like it, it's great, but nothing's soundproof, right? Foolproof even. There's a little bit to unpack here. So first of all, cost and complexity of these certifications. Certifications like Leaping Bunny require supply chain audits, which can be both time-consuming and expensive. So for smaller indie brands, this can be a major barrier. Not to mention tracking ingredient sourcing on a global scale is incredibly complicated. Another issue is the lack of uniform standards between different certifications. For example, Leaping Bunny mandates independent audits, but other programs like Peter's Beauty Without Bunnies rely on brands simply pledging not to test on animals. No audits, no third-party oversight, nothing really, just like a promise. And this inconsistency can confuse consumers and undermine trust in cruelty-free labeling. And then, of course, the issue of selling in China, which kind of leads to our first biggish controversy. Well, it's not really big. It's more of a concern, I guess you can say, over misleading claims and greenwashing. Some brands use fake bunny logos or vague terms like not tested on animals, but without formal certification. These claims are often unverifiable. Even worse, some companies might test ingredients on animals through suppliers, but market their finished products as cruelty-free. So this obviously allows unethical practices to hide behind like feel-good marketing. Also, let's be clear, there's a really common misunderstanding. Vegan doesn't always mean cruelty-free. A vegan product has no animal-derived ingredients, but it could still be tested on animals. Likewise, a cruelty-free product may contain ingredients like beeswax and honey. And I promise you, this is a very real confusion. People think they are getting both vegan and cruelty-free when it's just labeled as one thing, when really it could be just one or neither. But here's where it gets even more confusing for some people. Brands can be cruelty-free without having to get a certification. It's not a requirement. Smaller brands may follow cruelty-free practices, everything we've discussed, which would get them a Leaping Bunny certification, but skip the actual certification process, the use of simply having a logo on their package due to costs or logistical challenges. However, without these third-party verifications, consumers often find it hard to trust their cruelty-free claims. So if you are unsure about a brand's cruelty-free status, here's a few tips. Check reputable cruelty-free lists like Leaping Bunny or Cruelty-Free Kitty. They are good. Read a brand's testing policies. They are usually on their websites or the conglomerate's websites regarding suppliers and markets like China. Don't be afraid to message them directly as well. So are cruelty-free certifications perfect and are they necessary? No. There are costs and inconsistencies and controversies, especially when it comes to global regulations, but I do feel like there's still a really important step forward in creating a more ethical beauty industry and allowing us to be educated consumers. At the end of the day, being cruelty-free isn't just about a label, it's about transparency, accountability, and the choices we make as consumers. So the next time you see that little bunny logo or don't, remember it's not the whole story, but it's a good place to start. Let's move on to the future. Let's look into the future. Despite these advances in alternative methods, there is still a long way to go before animal testing becomes a thing of the past. Assuming we ever get there. Animal testing remains rightfully a very controversial and ethically charged issue. While it has undoubtedly played a significant role in medical progress, growing public concern for animal welfare combined with advancements in alternative testing methods and the fact that the general consumer is just more knowledgeable of how these testing methods are done, how tests are carried out, and how relevant or irrelevant they may be when it comes to our cosmetics. These advancements in alternative testing methods makes many people question whether it still has a place in our society. The number of countries banning animal testing and the sale of products which have been tested on animals is steadily growing. In recent years, Canada, Chile, Brazil, Australia, Colombia, South Korea, and more have been added to the list of countries that have implemented either a full or partial ban on animal testing on cosmetics. And also, given the growing demand for cruelty-free products from beauty consumers, many are much more hopeful than ever that the future of animal research may look very different, at least when it comes to cosmetics, at least. And if advancements in animal testing alternatives continue to develop at the rate they have done in recent years especially, there is at least a chance that we could see a completely cruelty-free cosmetics industry, hopefully in the not too distant future.